Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live, talk radio without the static. Email your questions and comments to lynn at pghcitypaper.com. And now your host, Lynn Cullen.
Hello to you. Hello. It's October 25th. That'd be a Wednesday, middle of the week. And as usual, quite a bit going on, none of it particularly pleasant. But it is our duty to slog intrepidly through the crap that is news now. I'm going to do something today I don't think I've ever done. And some of you may not like it, but sorry, I'm going to do it anyway. I will explain. I was at home last night, and it was about 9:30, 10-ish. I don't know exactly. And I thought that I would do what I try not to do very much, which is tune to some of those cable stations, MSNBC, CNN, because I wanted to see what they were saying about the speech given on the floor of the Senate by Senator Flake. And I turned to one, MSNBC, and Rachel Maddow was talking. She has a very, she doesn't necessarily do the news of the day. I've come to see that. She's always got her own thing that she's working on and, her own kind of journalism. She's every inch a journalist and an educator. And she wasn't giving me what I wanted. I wanted Flake, and I wanted to know what he said. And so I think I ended up with CNN, and I was watching people talk about him and it and what it meant or didn't, and whether it was brave or whether it was just he's quitting now so he can say what, what's on his mind, that this is no profile in courage, yada, 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 yada. And all of a sudden, something occurred to me that does not usually occur to me, and I think probably I'm not alone in that regard. And that is, why are you listening to other people talk about what they thought when you could go directly to the source? If you want to know about Jeff Flake's speech, then listen to it. And the fact is when my newspapers came this morning, I saw that they did not report his speech. They had bits of it, sentences here and there in their reports. The New York Times did excerpt quite a bit more, bigger hunks of it. It was a rather long speech. And I must say, not particularly well delivered. Senator Flake, for whether you find him noxious or honorable, is not an orator. His speech is extremely well written, but not well delivered. He stumbles over words, driving me crazy. But I went to the internet and Googled his speech, and I sat and I listened to it. And I was very glad that I did. I think it is an important speech because it was given on the floor of the Senate, and it was given to his fellow Republican senators who could not have been happy, who would have been, I would imagine, very uncomfortable and probably pissed off about what they would see as his self-righteousness on the way out the door. Easy for him. I just think that his speech said all of the things that we've all been saying. It was not a political speech. And this is what I think some people are missing, because he is the messenger, a very conservative Republican. People discount. Well, he should have said it earlier. He still votes with Trump. In fact, right after the speech, he voted for that noxious bill that keeps consumers from being able to sue banking institutions. He's a Goldwater Republican. But I didn't find the speech political in the way we think of it as political. It was a cry, much like that of Joseph Welch, the Army Council in 1954, appearing, asking to speak before the Senate, I'm not sure which committee, in which he doesn't matter, in which he said to Senator McCarthy, "Have you no decency, sir?" And that was like a revelatory moment in an America that had been fearful of Joe McCarthy's demagoguery for a good 4 years. He took so many people down, and everyone was afraid to stand up to him. And it only took that one question in the end to take him down. That is not, unhappily, the case today. But Jeff Flake was thinking of that. He wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post today in which he said that was exactly what he was thinking of. So you could say, oh, he was after his moment in history. Maybe, fine, whatever. But one of the things he says in it, which struck me, is that why don't we ever give anyone the benefit of the doubt anymore? Why do we not believe when someone says this is what he was saying we've become so distrustful of each other, and with, I would think, rather good reason. But I think, given the presidents he sought to quote, both Republicans, both great Republican presidents, Teddy Roosevelt and Abraham Lincoln, all this speech was a speech about dignity, decorum, honorable behavior. It wasn't about politics. So that I can look at this guy as an honorable man, even if I don't agree with him politically on anything. And we've gotten to the point where we don't separate those things anymore, do we? You can call him an opportunist, call him whatever you want, call him he's cutting and running instead of standing and fighting. He should fight and go down. He's just ceding the territory, whatever. But I want to say this, with an open heart and an open mind, please listen to his speech. Listen. We don't do that anymore. No American sits for 17 minutes listening to anybody. We have been conditioned to want something given to us in a soundbite, something quick, headline. And all of that has been to our detriment in every way. Politically, culturally, personally, socially. I'm going to ask you a favor. I'm going to ask you to, with me, because I am more than willing to listen for a second time. My bet is very few of you heard his speech. You heard parts of his speech, and you said, I heard his speech. No, you didn't. I am going to ask you to listen with me to a man who we do not agree with. I'm assuming this. We do not agree with politically at all. And I want to ask you afterwards if you did not feel common ground with that person, with this man, and how we've got to get back to being able to do that, or we as a nation are doomed. In the speech, he says a few things that I absolutely do not agree with, but very few. Very few. So please just move on. I don't want to take a call now. If you're calling, I am sorry. I want us all to do this thing together. Sorry. Pulling rank. If I lose you, I lose you. But I do recommend this speech, and I will happily listen to it with you. And here it is.
At a moment when it seems that our democracy is more defined by our discord and our dysfunction than by our own values and principles, let me begin by noting a somewhat obvious point, that these offices that we hold are not ours indefinitely. We're not here simply to mark time. Sustained incumbency is certainly not the point of seeking office, and there are times when we must risk our careers in favor of our principles. Now is such a time. It must also be said that I rise today with no small measure of regret. Regret because of the state of our disunion. Regret because of the disrepair and destructiveness of our politics. Regret because of the indecency of our discourse. Regret because of the coarseness of our leadership. Regret for the compromise of our moral authority. And by our, I mean all of our, complicity in this alarming and dangerous state of affairs. It is time for our complicity and our accommodation of the unacceptable to end. In this century, a new phrase has entered the language to describe the accommodation of a new and undesirable order, that phrase being the new normal. But we must never adjust to the present coarseness of our national dialogue with the tone set at the top. We must never regard as normal the regular and casual undermining of our democratic norms and ideals. We must never meekly accept the daily sundering of our country. The personal attacks, the threats against principles, freedoms and institution, the flagrant disregard for truth and decency, the reckless provocations, most often for the pettiest and most personal reasons, reasons having nothing whatsoever to do with the fortunes of the people that we have been elected to serve. None of these appalling features of our current politics should ever be regarded as normal. We must never allow ourselves to lapse into thinking that that is just the way things are now. If we simply become inured to this condition, thinking that it is just politics as usual, then heaven help us. Without fear of the consequences, and without consideration of the rules of what is politically safe or palatable, we must stop pretending that the degradation of our politics and the conduct of some in our executive branch are normal. They are not normal. Reckless, outrageous, and undignified behavior has become excused and countenanced as telling it like it is, when it is actually just reckless, outrageous, and undignified. And when such behavior emanates from the top of our government, it is something else. It is dangerous to a democracy. Such behavior does not project strength, because our strength comes from our values. It instead projects a corruption of the spirit and weakness. It is often said that children are watching. Well, they are. And what are we going to do about that? When the next generation asks us, why didn't you do something? Why didn't you speak up? What are we going to say? Mr. President, I rise today to say enough. We must dedicate ourselves to making sure that the anomalous never becomes the normal. With respect and humility, I must say that we have fooled ourselves for long enough that a pivot to governing is right around the corner. A return to civility and stability right behind it. We know better than that. By now, we all know better than that. Here today, I stand to say that we would be better served. We would better serve the country by better fulfilling our obligations under the Constitution by adhering to our Article 1 old normal, Mr. Madison's doctrine of separation of powers. This genius innovation which affirms Madison's status as a true visionary and for which Madison argued in Federalist 51, held that the equal branches of our government would balance and counteract with each other, if necessary. Ambition counteracts ambition, he wrote. But what happens if ambition fails to counteract ambition? What happens if stability fails to assert itself in the face of chaos and instability? If decency fails to call out indecency? Were the shoe on the other foot, would we Republicans meekly accept such behavior on display from dominant Democrats? Of course we wouldn't, and we would be wrong if we did. When we remain silent and fail to act, when we know that silence and inaction is the wrong thing to do because of political considerations, because we might make enemies, because we might alienate the base, because we might provoke a primary challenge, because ad infinitum, ad nauseum. When we succumb to those considerations in spite of what should be greater considerations and imperatives in defense of our institutions and our liberty, we dishonor our principles and forsake our obligations. Those things are far more important than politics. Now, I'm aware that more politically savvy people than I will caution against such talk. I'm aware that there is a segment of my party that believes that anything short of complete and unquestioning loyalty to a president who belongs to my party is unacceptable and suspect. If I have been critical, it is not because I relish criticizing the behavior of the President of the United States. If I have been critical, it is because I believe it is my obligation to do so, and as a matter and duty of conscience. The notion that one should stay silent as the norms and values that keep America strong are undermined, and as the alliances and agreements that ensure the stability of the entire world are routinely threatened by the level of thought that goes into 140 characters. The notion that we should say or do nothing in the face of such mercurial behavior is ahistoric, and I believe profoundly misguided. A Republican president named Roosevelt had this to say about the president and a citizen's relationship to the office. Quote, "The president is merely the most important among a large number of public servants. He should be supported or opposed exactly to the degree which is warranted by his good conduct or bad conduct, his efficiency or inefficiency in rendering loyal, able, and disinterested service to the nation as a whole." He continued, "Therefore, it is absolutely necessary that there should be a full liberty to tell the truth about his acts. And this means that it is exactly as necessary to blame him when he does wrong as to praise him when he does right. Any other attitude in an American citizen is both base and servile." President Roosevelt continued, "To announce that there must be no criticism of the president, or that we are to stand by a president, right or wrong, is not only unpatriotic and servile, but is morally treasonable to the American public." Unquote. Acting on conscience and principle is the manner in which we express our moral selves, and as such, loyalty to conscience and principle should supersede loyalty to any man or party. We can all be forgiven for failing in that measure from time to time. I certainly put myself at the top of the list of those who fall short in this regard. I am holier than none. But too often we rush to salvage principle, not to salvage principle, but to forgive and excuse our failures so that we might accommodate them and go right on failing until the accommodation itself becomes our principle. In that way and over time, we can justify almost any behavior and sacrifice any principle. I'm afraid that this is where we now find ourselves. When a leader correctly identifies real hurt and insecurity in our country and instead of addressing it goes to look for someone to blame, there is perhaps nothing more devastating to a pluralistic society. Leadership knows that most often a good place to start in assigning blame is to look somewhat closer to home. Leadership knows where the buck stops. Humility helps. Character counts. Leadership does not knowingly encourage or feed ugly or debased appetites in us. Leadership lives by the American creed, e pluribus unum, from many one. American leadership looks to the world and, just as Lincoln did, sees the family of man. Humanity is not a zero-sum game. When we have been at our most prosperous, we have been at our most principled. And when we do well, the rest of the world does well. These articles of civic faith have been critical to the American identity for as long as we have been alive. They are our birthright and our obligation. We must guard them jealously and pass them on for as long as the calendar has days. To betray them or to be unserious in their defense is a betrayal of the fundamental obligations of American leadership. And to behave as if they don't matter is simply not who we are. Now, the efficacy of American leadership around the globe has come into question. When the United States emerged from World War II, we contributed about half of the world's economic activity. It would have been easy to secure our dominance, keeping those countries who had been defeated or greatly weakened during the war in their place. We didn't do that. It would have been easy to focus inward. We resisted those impulses. Instead, we financed reconstruction of shattered countries and created international organizations and institutions that have helped provide security and foster prosperity around the world for more than 70 years. Now it seems that we, the architects of this visionary, rules-based world order that has brought so much freedom and prosperity, are the ones most eager to abandon it. The implications of this abandonment are profound, and the beneficiaries of this rather radical departure in the American approach to the world are the ideological enemies of our values. Despotism loves a vacuum, and our allies are now looking elsewhere for leadership. Why are they doing this? None of this is normal. And what do we, as United States senators, have to say about it? The principles that underlie our politics, the values of our founding, are too vital to our identity and to our survival to allow them to be compromised by the requirements of politics. Because politics can make us silent when we should speak, and silence can equal complicity. I have children and grandchildren to answer to, and so, Mr. President, I will not be complicit or silent. I've decided that I would be better able to represent the people of Arizona and to better serve my country and my conscience by freeing myself of the political consideration that consumed far too much bandwidth and would cause me to compromise far too many principles. To that end, I am announcing today that my service in the Senate will conclude at the end of my term in early January 2019. It is clear at this moment that a traditional conservative who believes in limited government and free markets, who is devoted to free trade, who is pro-immigration, has a narrower and narrower path to nomination in the Republican Party, the party that has so long defined itself by its belief in those things. It is also clear to me for the moment that we have given in or given up on the core principles in favor of a more viscerally satisfying anger and resentment. To be clear, the anger and resentment that the people feel at the royal mess that we've created are justified. But anger and resentment are not a governing philosophy. There is an undeniable potency to a populist appeal by mischaracterizing or misunderstanding our problems and giving in to the impulse to scapegoat and belittle threatens to turn us into a fearful, backward-looking people. In the case of the Republican Party, those things also threaten to turn us into a fearful, backward-looking minority party. We were not made great as a country by indulging in or even exalting our worst impulses, turning against ourselves, glorifying in the things that divide us, and calling fake things true and true things fake. And we did not become the beacon of freedom in the darkest corners of the world by flouting our institutions and failing to understand just how hard-won and vulnerable they are. This spell will eventually break. That is my belief. We will return to ourselves once more, and I say the sooner the better. Because we have a healthy government, we must also have healthy and functioning parties. We must respect each other again in an atmosphere of shared facts and shared values, comity and good faith. We must argue our positions fervently and never be afraid to compromise. We must assume the best of our fellow man and always look for the good. Until that day comes, we must be unafraid to stand up and speak out as if our country depends on it, because it does. I plan to spend the remaining 14 months of my Senate term doing just that. Mr. President, the graveyard is full of indispensable men and women. None of us here is indispensable. Nor were even the great figures of history who toiled at these very desks in this very chamber to shape the country that we have inherited. What is indispensable are the values that they consecrated in Philadelphia and in this place. Values which have endured and will endure for so long as men and women wish to remain free. What is indispensable is what we do here in defense of those values. A political career does not mean much if we are complicit in undermining these values. I thank my colleagues for indulging me here today. I will close by borrowing the words of President Lincoln, who knew more about healthy enmity and preserving our founding values than any other American who has ever lived. His words from his first inaugural were a prayer in his time and are now no less in ours. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break the bonds of our affection. The mystic chords of memory will swell when again touched, as surely as they will be by the better angels of our nature. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Okay, I hope you stayed with that. And as I said, I find that speech very moving. And I find it a genuine call to the country. And certainly he was calling on his own party to move away, to get back to what they were, instead of this horror that they've become. And if you think that's too strong a word, I was jotting down words that he used throughout. Reckless. Outrageous. He's talking about the President of the United States of his own party. Dangerous. Corruption. Chaos. Indecency. Dishonor our principles. Betrayal. radical despotism. And to his quote of Teddy Roosevelt was, I thought, the most, I can't imagine. His voice shook a few times. He was, for him, I think this was it was a very difficult speech to give in many ways. And he essentially said to Mitch McConnell and all the others who say that somehow standing with the president is what every good Republican must do. And he said that, quoting Roosevelt, is base and servile. Those are strong words. He essentially called his colleagues in the Republican Party base and servile and said that their actions were morally treasonable. I thought it was a great speech. Actually, when I heard it the first time, I cried. Anger and resentment are not a governing principle. Governing philosophy, I think he said. And he warned that the Republican Party was becoming a party of fearful and backward-looking people. You can say what you want about his politics. Say what you want about he didn't say it till he wasn't running again. I don't care. That's a speech that's important. And we have gotten to the point where we can't even take down our defensive stances long enough to listen to somebody. Listen to them on the other side. We're doomed if we can't. We're doomed if the first position we get in, no matter what, is a defensive crouch, depending on what party do you belong to. Do you agree with me on this, that, and the other thing? Because otherwise I'm not listening to you. We're doomed if we go that way. I am hoping, maybe against hope, that his words stayed with one or maybe two other senators who might find it difficult to sleep a little bit. And maybe they too will come out. The most courageous one will be somebody who is up for re-election and is thought to be someone who could win, but who goes after Trump and thus brings to bear all of the ammunition that a sitting president and Steve Bannon can bring to bear on him. Somebody who truly puts his job up, puts the principles and values of the nation higher. I don't know. I'm not eloquent. I thought that was eloquent. I really thought it was eloquent. And I also thought it was heartfelt. And that's moving. That's moving. Mitch McConnell stood up right afterwards and said, "Thank you, very eloquent." Something. You're a principled man. Clearly didn't hear a word of it. Well, Mark disagrees with me, and here it comes. I guess that I am somewhat amazed that anyone considers what Senator Flake said is in any way profound. It seems to me that he was simply stating the obvious. He said the same things that all of us have been told our entire lives. The Ten Commandments, the Boy Scout oath, George Washington, blah, blah, blah. My son was a foreign exchange student with Rotary International. Rotary required the kids to read The Ugly American before going abroad. This encouraged kids to be humble and respectful of those from other parts of the world, the exact opposite of Donald Trump. It is sad that the courage of Flake and Corker is only on display when they've chosen to leave. I will applaud someone who speaks out and stays to speak out again. There is a very sad story of a young man, a follower of Milo and the alt-right, who killed his father because he thought he was a leftist. Trump once described, Trump and his base are poisoning our society. Well, that's what Flake said. And a group of selfish cowards turn their heads and say nothing. That's what Flake said. Where are the rest of the people who once described themselves as the party of family values and patriotism? Maybe we're just not who we think we are. We have a caller. Not. Yes, caller? Hello? Go ahead. Caller?
Hello, caller.
Yeah,
Hello?
yeah. Go ahead.
Hey, yeah, I agree with you on all that. I was saying that yesterday. I give him credit. I give Corker credit. I don't like any of their politics. I'm like you. I give McCain, even Lindsey Graham at times. He's said stuff. But I'm thinking when they can't get this tax cut through, they're going to shit can them. They want to just keep them going until they get their tax cut for the rich pals. Once they do it, I think they'll probably, something will go on where they'll maybe try to force them out. I don't know. That's what I'm thinking they're waiting for.
Well, the sense is, and what you're saying is that they're holding their nose till they get that, the holy grail of more money for the greedy and rich, and then they might turn on them. I don't know. I mean, possible, and it's repulsive.
Yeah.
It's simply repulsive, and anyone who simply can't do it anymore will get a tip of the hat from me for whatever. So Corker, McCain, Flake, I know they all vote with them. They are conservative Republicans, but they also are aware that if we allow what is going on now to be considered normal or to in any way aid and abet it, that we are helping the disintegration of everything that this country stood for. So,
and they were, their party was in trouble way before Trump.
Well, yes.
I mean, they were stonewalling Obama like crazy.
Right.
So they brought all this on themselves with all these people they got elected that were Tea Party. So it's in their making of all of it. And
Right.
Trump's like the last straw of it.
This is the Frankenstein monster. Right. They created it.
Yeah, they created
There's no
it.
doubt about it. And it served them well
Maybe
for a
they'll
long
play it
time.
someday.
But now it's threatening
Okay, we'll
to
see
take
ya.
the whole country down by. Thank you. Henry writes, if you had given me the written text of Flake's speech, and if you had told me it was a speech by Roosevelt or Truman or Kennedy, I would have believed you. His speech had an almost Churchill-like tone. His speech loses just a little of its edge, given that he sounded so nervous. It sounds better on paper. Yeah, he doesn't do a good delivery, which is too bad. But if this country returns to anything that even slightly resembles a norm or status quo, history may identify his speech as the starting point. Now, I think it is a historically important speech, and we'll see. No matter what happens, I think it's a historically important speech. Ed says, he's telling me if I read this thing on the Daily Beast that is headlined, Great Speech, Jeff Flake, now do something about Trump. Well, I think what he's going to do is, now that he is totally unfettered, he's going to be speaking out, like Corker. So you got two of them speaking truth, and both still in positions of some power, especially Corker. I don't know. I think that, as Tomasky, the guy who wrote the Daily Beast story, says, now what are Corker and Flake going to do? If they do nothing, then they're just saying words. Also, did you notice there was almost no one in the hall when Flake spoke? That I didn't know, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We'll see what they do. They are 2 of 100. It does limit what they can do. They've already done what they can do in stating their revulsion, disgust, and fear of this administration. And that puts them on my side. I don't care what their politics are. And that's the point I'm trying to make today. I'm on their side now. We're on the same side. Because this is bigger than our usual politics. This is called saving our nation. And if you think I'm overstating the case, I'm sorry. I do not think I am. And Barbara writes in huge capital letters, after a day, Jeff Flake and Bob Corker joined Trump to upend a major consumer protection. They're Republicans! That's what they believe. They believe in government shouldn't be regulated. That doesn't mean they're dishonorable men. That's the politics I'm saying. This is not about politics. What he was talking about. It's about the goddamn survival of our country. It's not about a vote. What do you think he's going to vote? He's a conservative Republican. And I'm on his side now in this bigger battle. We're on the same side in this bigger battle. And if you can't see that this is bigger than our politics, then we're in big trouble. I'm sorry. Didn't mean to scream at you, Barbara. Let me tell you about somebody. This is a guy named Keith Mines. He has spent his entire professional life navigating civil wars in other countries. He has been with U.S. Special Forces. He has worked in the United Nations, and he has worked in the State Department, and he was overseas for something like 16 years, and he came back to the United States recently. And he's freaked out. This is a man who saw Afghanistan come apart, Colombia, El Salvador, Iraq, Somalia, Sudan. He knows about civil war. And when he was asked by Foreign Policy magazine, give us a percentage. What percentage of likelihood is it that the United States could essentially be in a civil war in the next 10 to 15 years? And he said, looking at what I'm seeing, looking at how I know what a country looks like as they devolve into a situation where only civil war is the only thing anybody on either side can see, he'd say, I'd give the United States about a 60% chance of being in a civil war in 10 to 15 years. Okay? They asked other experts in the field, Foreign Policy magazine. Some experts predicted 95%. They said, we're going there. That's clearly what's happening. Now, I'm not talking about dressing up and marching on Gettysburg, because this is a different civil war. This will be a different kind of civil war. But putting together all of the experts' predictions, the average comes out to a 35% chance, which is still way too high for me. And these are people who know how societies devolve into chaos. If you don't think that is where we are heading, then I don't think you're paying attention, or I don't think that your fear is allowing you to see clearly what's happening. We're in grave danger. And I don't give a shit how Jeff Flake voted on that bill or any bill. We have two parties. We have people who think less government and blah, 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 and leave it all to the free market. And blah, 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 blah. I don't believe it. We got people on the other side. That's where I stand. The people over there who don't believe like I do are not evil, necessarily, any more than we are evil for not believing what they believe. And the fact that we can't tell the difference anymore is part of why people who understand how countries come apart say we are in danger. Never in my life did I think I would witness what I'm seeing now. Never in my life did I think I would say what I'm saying now. It could never happen to us. I think we all think that, thought that. I don't think it anymore. These experts said there are certain conditions that occur before a civil war. And guess what, guys? We got all of them going. Total national polarization. No way to see any resolution. Increasingly divisive media and information. Weakened institutions. An abandonment of responsibility by political leadership. And the legitimization of violence. Think of Trump on the campaign trail. He was legitimizing violence on the campaign trail, and it got him elected. This same guy who spent so much of his life looking at other countries come apart said this: if you know your history, right now, United States, it's a lot like 1859. I hate to tell you this, guys. That was like a few years before the war. It's like 1859. Everybody is enraged and everybody has a gun. Another historian said, if you look at the map of red and blue states and put it over a map of the Confederacy and the Union, it ain't a lot different. And I've maintained for years that the Civil War, we didn't win the Civil War. It was a battle. We won that battle called the Civil War. We didn't win the war, and we are now losing it. We've been losing it for years because the country never really changed. All we managed to do was get rid of slavery. That's all that happened. And still managed to find ways to deprive our black citizens. Right before the Civil War, you know what happened? Both parties. There were two parties pretty much then. The Whigs and the Democrats. The Whigs came apart at the seams. And a new party got born, the Republican Party, and Abraham Lincoln was its first candidate for president. Parties come apart. When parties risk disintegration, the opportunities for a civil war of some sort then becomes a lot more likely. So this guy who's looked at other countries go down said, watch the parties. They are an indicator of America's political health. And if they're an indicator, we're sick. Very, very sick. And another historian tells Foreign Policy magazine that, in the 1850s, when America was getting to the point where they were going to have to shoot it out, he said Americans were not good at absorbing the shock of events. Things started happening, and people were destabilized. Nobody knew what to do. Chaos reigned. And he says it's exactly what's going on now. We're 11 months into Trump. We're trying to figure out what the hell happened. How did this happen? We still, like the Americans in 1850s, are saying, what's going on? What can we do? What can be done? Here's what an historian said. We know we are at risk of civil war or something like it when an election becomes utterly unacceptable to a large group of Americans, a single constituency of Americans. You can argue that Barack Obama's presidency was unacceptable to a large number of Americans. We found that out. And what did those people give us in return? Donald Trump. So I think the battle lines are pretty well drawn here. Here is something written by a historian, a journalist. He was writing in 1867. This is after the end of the Civil War. The lesson of the war that should never depart from us is that the American people have no exemption from the ordinary fate of humankind. I want you to think about that. We who think it could never happen here better jettison that idea now, that belief, because it is clearly untrue. Why? Americans are somehow different? No, we ain't, as it turns out. We have no exemption. Brooke writes, your emailer, Mark, said that Flake is stating the obvious, but sometimes we have to be reminded of the obvious. In a storm, you must have a star to guide you, and if Flake is that star right now, I'll take it. A week or so ago, you said that Pence and the cabinet will never remove the president based on courage. Rather, you said they'd do it if it would, sure, Pence wants to be the president, if it would be for their political gain. Flake is not doing this for political gain. That is true. No. And in that regard, it was courageous. Chuck writes, I took to CNN last night to catch up on Flake's speech. During one break, CNN aired a commercial making a case for impeachment. Yeah, I've had a lot of you send me that. After some research, I found the organization that created the commercial. Is called needtoimpeach.com. It is funded by a billionaire, Tom Steyer, progressive billionaire, who has put up $10 million of his own money for this effort. His commercial is well written. He states the case in a very soft voice. Chuck writes, I was somewhat amazed by the commercial, and once again, I think unprecedented. We've never seen a commercial like this, only 9-10 months into a president's term. No. And we've never seen senators of the president's own party stand on the floor of the Senate and use words like debasement and danger, right? Norma writes, the same liberals who are discounting Flake because he's a Republican are the same people who couldn't vote for Hillary because she couldn't meet their left-wing purity tests. Well, as I said, Norma, yeah, time for litmus test. The only test now is, do you want to see this great experiment in representative democracy called the United States of America continue? Or do you want to live to see it gone? And what will replace it? We aren't immune. Let's get that through our heads. We aren't immune. Beth writes, since McConnell has found some new friendship with the Trump administration, which makes one think, what dirt did they dig up on Mitch? Wonder how long it will be until he punishes both Corker and Flake. Both these guys are on some pretty serious Senate committees, foreign relations, energy, judicial, banking, housing. As majority leader, he could reassign them to other committees, I believe. A good way to spread fear to other Republican Senate members if you decide to vote yeah, I could do this to you. Well, if it comes to that, if it's hardball going to be played like that, that tells you something too. Yeah, I can't imagine that, but I can't imagine most of what has happened in the last year. And I'm starting to pull out of my own wishful thinking, my own blindness to how bad this is. I'll tell you. I'm sorry if what am I sorry if? I'm not sorry. I'm not sorry. I'm telling you what I think. And I think I've got a very good reason for thinking as I do, and for suggesting that now is not the time for business as usual, which is to say, I'm a Democrat or I'm a progressive and this is what I think and those people are my enemy. No, there's a bigger thing happening here. You ain't going to be able to enact anything, progressive, if we don't even have a goddamn democracy. Got to have some realignments here so that I can say I'm standing with Jeff Flake. I don't agree with him politically, but he and I are totally on the same page in our love of country and our sense of the danger it is in and the need to stand against the people who would destroy it. Okay, now I'm going to take a deep breath and maybe engage in some, what's that called? the different nostril breathing. It helps just bring the blood pressure down. And I hope you all have a good day. Thank you. See you tomorrow.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper or its advertisers.